The short-lived reign of the RMC came to a dramatic end on the morning of October 25, 1983, when 500 airborne Rangers and U.S. Marines landed at the Point Salines Airport at the southeastern point of Grenada.
A very warm welcome to Resilience of the Spice Isle. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for joining us. This week's presentation will focus on compensation, its implication, and the art form. Now, the recurring question pertains to the fate of individuals affected by the tragedy of Wednesday, October the 19th, 1983. Many suffered injuries and permanent scars, prompting ongoing inquiries into the issue of compensation. Alexis Simon, who was present at the fort on that day, lost his left arm in an explosion. He embodies the lingering questions surrounding compensation. Despite the passage of time, discussions on this matter remain unresolved, leaving individuals like Alexis seeking closure and acknowledgement of their suffering.
My brother, this goes to the core of my being. This goes to the core of my heart. The issue of rehabilitation for the children. And when I say rehabilitation, counseling for the trauma. When I just came from the hospital, I would have only come out in the living room, on the breakfast table, to eat. And when I finished eat, back in my room. I didn't want to see outside. Because the loss of a member of your body at age 17 is traumatized. It's a lot of things going through your mind. And I have here on my phone a few persons, at least 2 individuals. A girl who got 7 bullets on her leg, not one of the bullets touched her bone, thank God. She's in her 60s right now. She never got compensation. So, the whole idea of rehabilitation before compensation ought to be done by our authorities. And yet, nothing. We're celebrating 50 years as an independent nation, and 50 years of not coming together still as a people, especially when it comes to the revolution and the collapse of the revolution and the injured, those who got injured and continue to live with the memories and the horror of the October 19, like persons like myself. I recall last year, I was listening to the news when they would have been talking about the commemoration of the October 19th into a public holiday, which I must commend Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell for. Yes, because it's a day that Grenadians ought to reconcile. It's a day should be named a public holiday. It's a day that Grenadians need to reflect back. One of the GBN reporters approaching the Prime Minister and asking him, seeing that they're going to be making the October 19th a public holiday, are you going to consider compensation for the survivors of the October 19, or the victims of the October 19? What did our beloved Prime Minister say at the time? No. Which was shocking, sad, very sad to me. And after he would have said that, the Attorney General got up and she addressed the media by stating that there was some persons who got compensated during the October 19 massacre. I would have started working for the state in 1985. So the then Herbert Augustus Blaise government would have just had 4 months in office. 4 months. And yet, you all are telling me now that the Herbert Blaze administration paid compensation to the victims of the October 19, and that person like myself would have just fallen through the crack. Who are you talking to? I am well known. There isn't a newspaper in Grenada that does not know about me. There isn't a government ministry that does not know about me. So how would I forget, or how that would have happened, that the Blaze administration would have started a compensation package for the victims and I was not aware? Or some of the very persons that I know of never got compensation. They were not even aware of that either. And that the Attorney General last year, when she would have made a statement that there was a compensation package by the Blaze administration and that person would have fallen through the crack. I don't know. I don't know who they're talking to. No, I don't know who they're talking to. So, the Prime Minister at the time says no compensation. He did not elaborate to say here that we may take that into consideration. He did not say, well, let's look at it later on down, or probably that might be in the making. Nothing of the sort. He just says no, and then the Attorney General got up. What does that tell you? That they have no intentions of paying no compensation to the victims of the October 19 or the survivors of the October 19.
We eagerly anticipate that decision regarding compensation for the Grenadian people affected by the events of that day. Transitioning now from this crucial topic to one of creativity. Caribbean culture is renowned for its ability to draw inspiration from historical events, shaping them into songs, poetry, and dramatic pieces. This creativity is vividly displayed annually as our people engage in writing and producing artistic works. Today we discuss how the events of the Revolution are portrayed through artistic forms. Francis Urias Peters, the artistic director of La Boucan Creative Center, exemplifies this creative response by crafting Redemption Time, a theatrical production that dramatizes the events of the Revolution.
Then in 1984, I got a fellowship through the OAS and the government of Grenada at that time to do drama in education and theatre arts at the Edna Manley College. At that time, it was called the Cultural Training Center. We had to force a 3-year course into 2 years. I mean, it was really a lot of work. And I can remember a colleague of mine, he was like a mentor of ours. His name is Alwyn Bully. He died recently, a lovely human being. He was one of the guys who was responsible for settle us in and be the mentor for us in Jamaica to ensure that we really had a good stay, and he did a lovely job. And Alwyn came one afternoon, a Friday afternoon, we were sitting at the amphitheater, and he said that he was offered a project to write a play on the Grenada Revolution. I think that was with UNESCO he was working with at that time. And then Alwyn said that he had to turn it down, and I asked him why, and then he says, well, he never lived in Grenada. He was never part of the Grenada Revolution, and he could not write it. I couldn't understand why until later on when I started developing myself even in the art of playwriting. And one of my beliefs is that whenever you're writing a play, you must declare, this I believe. You must write from a sense of truth. And it's only years after I realized, hey, that this man is a man of principle, because I'm sure they were offering maybe a fair amount of money to do it. And it was around the time, that must have been 84, 85, and I told myself, listen, Urias, you have to write a play on the Grenada Revolution, because there are so many unanswered questions. It was a very traumatic period where there was no counseling, no therapy. After that, a lot of unanswered questions. And so when I came back to Grenada in 1986, that was my mission. I'm going to write a play on the Grenada Revolution. And years went by. Then 2013 came and I realized that's the 30th anniversary of the Grenada Revolution. And I promised to write a play on that because nobody had touched that theme during that time period. And I felt the writer's guilt. And I picked up pen and paper. It was early January of 2013, and I wrote the first half of the play. And I call it Redemption Time. We had a reading at Otway's house, in fact, the same building where Maurice Bishop's father was killed when they had the demonstrations and the riots against Gary. Hour and 15 minutes, we had an audience. People were intrigued and enthused. And then I declared the full-length production will be staged, will be written and staged in October 19th, to coincide with the activities of October 19th. And little did I realize that sometimes work of art, it is hard to put a time span on that. So October 19th came and I just didn't write another word. And what was my challenge here is that there were so many unanswered questions. Because for the first part of the play was set during the Gary era, where I started late 1978 and went into the overthrow. That's where it ended at March 13th, 1979. Because I grew up in the country, I lived through Eric Matthew Gary era. I understand a little bit more about Gary. I understand the personalities and the intrigue that went down. As a matter of fact, one of the characters that I created, it was created after an old aunt that I grew up with in the country, and she was a staunch Gary supporter. She was a Catholic also. She said that I'm a Catholic and I'm a Garyite and nobody cannot move me. So I created that character there in the play. The only difference I made was that I didn't make her into a Roman Catholic. She was a spiritual Baptist, you know, where she had this gift where she can see things before they actually happen. So I just find writer's block. I couldn't go forward. A lot of unanswered questions I was asking myself, because the reason for the overthrow of Gary, based on the New Jewel movement, was that they got intelligence that Gary was going to, he left the country and left information that they have to either be wiped out or they have to be in prison. That was one of the reasons why Ellison felt I didn't have a choice, so he had to be overthrown. And so I had to ask myself the question, is this facts or is it truth? You know, because sometimes you can have facts, and the facts could be, the way you interpret it, it could be untruthful. So I asked myself that question versus, is it a fact and true that they were planning to overthrow Gary? And quite naturally, Gary realized that if these guys are going to overthrow me, well then here I cannot tolerate that. So a lot of these questions were lingering in my mind. Also, we had about 17 prisoners, guys from the New Jewel movement, or the People's Revolutionary Government, who were in prison for 27 years. And I knew for a fact, based on information, credible information, that some of the guys, a couple of them, who were convicted and sent to prison, they were not even on the fort on October 19th. They had nothing to do with the killing. So, you know, these sort of things start troubling me. The issues, you know, is that why after, you know, as colleagues, you all went through system-less for over 4.5 years, it didn't work, but how can you, so unlike our Grenadian, our traditions, our culture, who we are as a people, line up your own colleagues, including a woman also, and just gun her down? These were things that I just couldn't understand. And I realized here to just go and write a play based on just emotions and my own personal feeling that couldn't, it wasn't the best approach. And then came 2003, 2004 Hurricane Ivan mashed up the entire country. 2005, another hurricane. So there was no way that any writing could have taken place around that time. And then 2013 came and I realized, hey, your eyes, this is 30 years and you had made a promise. And then I realized, hey, there are times when you have to force yourself. So I did interviews, both formal and informal interviews. I did a lot of reading, and I was able to write a first draft. I call in some of my actors, because that's the way I work. I work very unconventional, because I see most of the time we direct our own work, because it's not that I want to, but it's a small theatre community, a small theatre movement, and yeah, there aren't many directors around, so I decided, listen, we're going to workshop this production. Certain things we had to cut off. I brought folks who were part of the revolution to talk to us, to give us insights, you know. And even when we had the first public reading again, I brought them in, and then they said, yes, Urias, I think that you're on the right path. And so around the October of 2013, which marked the 30th anniversary of the demise of the revolution, the play was staged at the Spice Basket Theatre in Beaulieu, St. George's. And for me, the response was beyond my expectations. And especially from the school children. At one showing we had about 800 to 1,000 school children. The entire auditorium was filled. And after the play, the students were coming up and asking questions. So, Mr. Peters, did this actually happen in Grenada? I said, this and much more. I also realized here that the play was also therapy, because one woman who came to the play, at the end of it, she was just in tears. She was crying. And we asked her, why? She said she was pregnant in October 19 to 25th. She was pregnant. And she was from Guave. And there was a time when, of course, we were under house arrest. And there was a release where you could go and get water. So she was up by the standpipe, catching the water with some friends. And then she saw this military vehicle coming down. And they had to run. She fell. Somebody walked upon her stomach. And she said, after so many years, from 1983, then this is 2013, she realized, but I could have lost my child. And then she started to cry as a result. So again here, for the 40th anniversary of the demise, we are planning to do this play over again. It's called Redemption Time, because I try to use maybe a biblical term, you know, at this time which we have to redeem. There's a lot of unanswered questions. I know there are still people based on the side of the fence, the political side that you fell on, because quite naturally, the people, guys from the New Drill movement, some of them suffered beatings on the Gary regime, and vice versa. When the New Drill movement came in, became the People's Revolutionary Government, over 3,000 people were incarcerated up at Richmond Hill Prison over that 4.5-year period. So there was animosity on both sides. There was a lot of bloodshed, you know. There was the war, there was people, young soldiers lost their lives. There's a lot even during the time of the People's Revolutionary Government. I mean, there's some brothers and friends who were traveling in a car one night, and that car was riddled with bullets, and there was accusation on both sides that the community was accusing the soldiers of carrying out the shootings. The government was accusing another counter-revolutionary group who they said was the ones that are responsible for killing these guys, killing the guys. You know, so that was bloodshed. I remember again, soon after that, the soldiers came looking for the guys that said who did the shooting. And these guys were rounded up, shot, executed right there on the spot, wrapped up in plastic bags, I understand, and then brought in into St. George's. You know, so there was always this bloodshed, and I say, hey, listen, I need to get to the bottom of it, whether it's facts or truth. And again, we had to find somewhere where we can atone. And that's one of the reason why I call the play Redemption Time.
This whole situation got out of control. There was nobody in charge. From the time they brought Morris on the phone, that just spelled disaster.
But Morris is the commander-in-chief, he's in charge.
Fort Rupert is the military headquarters. You take thousands of civilians, you bring them on the phone. Nobody in charge of them, the ammunition or anything. So then what the hell do you expect?
So that's justifiable reason for his execution, eh? That's what you're trying to tell me? Hey, boys, doing on the radio, making them lies for announcements, eh?
Careful.
Don't put a gun to your head to make them say them lies.
Careful. Be careful what you say.
It was not as easy a task of completing the play as I thought, you know, because here you have a period during the Gary era, because you cannot speak about the revolution without speaking about Eric Matthew Gary. And so you had the Gary era, plus you had the People's Revolutionary Government era, which is 4.5 years. And how can you condense a 5-year period into that short space of time? As a matter of fact, when the play was staged the very first time, it went in about 3 hours. And people said, I love the play, because it was an intermission also. The intermission was a bit too long, but it was too long. And that actually worried me. So the next day, I called the cast in very early, 3 hours before, and I says, and I did my homework. I says, guys, part of the scene had to cut, and merge into another scene. And they said, but you were asked, how can we do that? I said, we don't have a choice. We have to do it. And right there and then, we had to rehearse. You had two personalities. Eric Matthew Gary, who was the father of independence, who led Grenada into independence. His regime, the Grenada United Labour Party, who was overthrown. And he was a man people loved, despite there were those who really had challenges with him. And of course, you had Morris Bishop, another iconic figure, another man who was well loved. How will I really script these two characters into a play like that? These two larger-than-life characters. Will I get actors to really portray these characters believably? And I start thinking, I say, you know, I don't think that is possible. I can't go that way. That's going to be too much of a difficult task. If it was a film, maybe. And so what I did was to change my focus and adapted what I will call the journalistic approach, where I was taught at one time here that whatever the issue that you're dealing with, work with it from the standpoint of how it affects the real people. And the real people is the average man and woman on the street, not the Governor General, not the Pope, not the Prime Minister, not the Bishop, but how this issue affects the average man on the street. And I says, you know what? Idea, the journal I just started, where I'm going to create a working class family and to show how the two political divides at that time affected this working class family. And so the first character I created was a woman called Miss Audrey, who was a spiritual Baptist. She also was a strong Garyite, and I patterned her after my aunt, Auntie Baby, who I grew up with in the country. Gary was a god for her, and she can do no wrong. So that was how Gary was, that character was created. Then I worked on, she had two sons. In fact, before that, she also had a husband, but that husband doesn't appear in the play. But he was a police officer, and because he never supported Gary, he was sent to the sister isle of Carriacou, where he stayed there and became an alcoholic. And as a result now, she and him never had a great relationship because he was against Gary. And it's just to show how the divisiveness of the politics really can destroy a family, can affect love, can affect relationship. And then she had two children. One, there was Steve, was the younger one, who loved his father dearly. And then he eventually became a member of the New Jewel movement. He had itching eyes, he adored Morris Bishop. So you can imagine, and that was before the overthrow. So you can imagine that this woman, she is a Garyite. She benefited from Gary. She was there in 1951 as a young woman who understood what it was when Grenadians were working for 3 shillings a day, working for, I mean, where the economic situation was so deplorable. And when Gary came in 1951, as the champion for the working class, I mean, Gary could no wrong. He was a hero in his own right. And here is now Steve, her young son now, is opposing Gary. And that is where the tension and the additional conflict clashed between her and her son. She has also another son called Winston, who became a born-again Christian. He was a guy, of course, a man of the world. And I eventually created those characters here at that time to show the religious conflict, because she was from a spiritual Baptist, and he's an evangelical Pentecostal Christian who felt as though his religion was much more superior to hers. And there again, I think just created that sort of dynamics that eventually going to lead to a lot of conflict, crisis, and complications. So that's how I created a family problem, even though the surrounding circumstances was charged, very politically charged. And so that's how eventually the play took a life of its own. Miss Audrey was a sort of representation of Eric Matthew Gary, the ideals of him. That's how it was replaced. And then you had a character called Joseph, who represented the intelligentsia, part of the New Jewel movement, / the People's Revolutionary Government. And so I pinned both of them against each other, and that's where the whole conflict of the play evolved. And I was able to capture, because with that production, the play itself, I merged, it was like a multimedia production where we did film, we had photographs, because there's a war where Miss Audrey's son, this young guy, went to war. He was one of the guys who went to war against the Americans. And so we were able to get footage of the war, the Americans landing in Grenada, and simulate it on stage with the guys actually fighting the real war. So, but again, apart from just working on the play itself, the information, what I got here, how do I disseminate some of the information? So I had to bring in another character, a young lady called Rachel, atheist. She was a member of the New Jewel movement. And Winston, this born-again Christian, that was a former boyfriend. You know, she went to the United States to study, came back, and she wanted Winston to come to join the New Jewel movement, the National Youth Organization. And of course, he said that he's following a different path right now. So that created the conflict where an argument started up. And the result of the argument between both of them, where I had to be fair, because during the revolution, there were a lot of positive things that happened, where for the very first time you had women who were able to receive maternity leave. They formed the National Insurance Company. A lot of young people were able to go to study Cuba and other friendly countries for the revolution. I guess in the normal swing of things, a lot of them would not have gotten an opportunity to achieve a higher educational studies. So I had to be fair to that. But while on the other hand, of course, there's a dark side where I said people incarcerated. There a lot of high-handedness. So it was between that argument between Rachel and Winston, the born-again Christian, I was able to deliver a lot of the issues during that period there. But for my statement again in the play itself, because I believe spirituality and being religious are two different things, you know. And there you had coming towards the end of the play where Steve, well, I guess I can say that Steve died. They never saw him again. But when the brother, Winston, found out the cause of his death was Joseph, the high-ranking officer of the PRG, who was responsible for his death. That's how Winston thought. He decided he was going to pick up a gun and to go to kill Joseph. And it was the same so-called atheist woman, Rachel, who have to bring him back to reality and says, listen, you quote some of scriptures, you forgiveness and redemption and all these things here. So she was the one, I'm saying, who was not a church girl, but still had to bring him back and to bring some measure of sanctity to his life and to the whole plot of the play. So I think it is one of my most important pieces of work. And hence the reason why I'm going to be doing it again October, November. Because Grenada's population, I think about 65% of the population, they are under the age of 35 or under the age of 40. So a lot of them, they did not experience the revolution. They did not experience the Gary era. And I always go back to that quote by Marcus Garvey, that the people who have no sense of the history is like a tree without roots. And I'd add that even in the theme song in the play, people without a sense of history is like a ship on the high seas. I think there's another quote saying again that if you forget your history, you turn your back. You forget your history, you have a potential to repeat the mistakes of the past. People who turn their back on the traditions and their cultural value, to me, is like a formula for chaos and decadence. And we know that the Caribbean, the region, the world is going through a very, very, very serious decay, crime, high cost of living, and we can cope. And I find here in Grenada right now here that is one thing, a problem that we have, we don't know our history. And for the very first time, I believe in the education system, this year they will be introducing Grenadian history into the classroom. And I think that, you know, that's something that they have to be applauded for, and I'm happy here that I'm doing over the play, Redemption Time, so it can complement that move by the Ministry of Education to bring history into the classroom. So we're also hoping here that we can do this play through the ministry for the school population. So here again is bringing history, and again I believe too that that's the best way to teach, using the arts. It's like a theater in education project. And what I hope again is that we can take a piece of history, slice of the past, bring it to the present, let our students know what happened and what can happen when you lose your sense of reasoning, where people who are friends, where we are, irrespective of the political spectrum or the religious belief here, we are one people. And when you lose that reasoning and resort to bloodshed, I think it's one of the biggest tragedy that you can ever realize. So this is one of the reasons why we are doing a Redemption Time over. Mm-hmm.
And that remarkable skill of Francis Urias Peters to dramatize that chapter in the nation's history serves as a testament to the resilience of the Grenadian people. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. This has been Resilience of the Spice Isle. Thanks for your time.